Welcome everyone to our Time to Restore Texas workshop, Informing Climate Smart Plantings for Pollinators. We're so glad to have you all joining us this morning. My name is Erin Postumus. I am the Partnerships and Projects Coordinator for the USA National Phenology Network, which is located at the University of Arizona here in Tucson. Just to tell you a little bit about me, my background is in environmental biology and wildlife conservation and management, and I've been with the USA-NPN since 2010. I'm also the lead for the NPN on the Time to Restore project. Joining me today is David Gwynn, who is our Texas coordinator for Time to Restore. I'll pass it over to David to give a short intro.
Good morning, Texas. We're excited that you're joining us on this Saturday morning and look forward to a very exciting and active workshop this morning. Like Erin said, I'm David Gwynn, the Texas coordinator for Time to Restore. I'm based in Houston and also an active Gulf Coast chapter member of the Texas Master Naturalists. So welcome, and we're glad you're here. Look forward to learning and building as we move forward. Thank you.
So just a couple of housekeeping notes before we get started with the workshop. We are recording the workshop and we will be sending out the recording to everyone who registered. We'll probably be doing that in the next week or so. Just to give you a little bit of an orientation to our Zoom meeting today, you can use the Q&A, which should be located on the Zoom panel for any questions that you have. We plan to have a Q&A at the end of the workshop today, so please put any questions that you'd like David or I to answer in that, and we'll make sure we get to them. We also have a chat box, so you can use the chat, especially if you have any technical issues, to let us know about those. We don't have a scheduled break for the workshop today, but feel free to step out and you can rejoin us when you need. We are recording the workshop, so you'll be able to catch up on anything that you missed. And then lastly, this workshop is going to be very interactive. We really would like your input. So make sure that you are ready to participate. It might be useful for you to have an additional device if you're watching this webinar on your computer, your mobile phone, or maybe a tablet. That will really help you to participate in some of the polling we're going to do. If you don't have that accessible, that's fine. You can open another tab on your browser and participate that way. If you're watching this on a phone, maybe have a computer or another device nearby, and that might help you out. The agenda for today is we're going to start off with a background on what was the inspiration for this Time to Restore project, and give you some more information about how this project is going to help with pollinator restoration and conservation. Then we really want to get your input on the priority nectar species that are going to be the focus of data collection for this project. So we're going to have some direct input from you all on which species you feel are most important to you. We also want to get your input on the things that are going to be coming out of this project. So we're going to ask you some specific questions about what's important to you about this kind of information and what you'd like that to look like. Then we're going to give you a really quick overview on just the basics on how you can collect data as part of this project. There'll be more opportunities for more in-depth training later on. And then lastly, we want to get your ideas about how we can really make this project very successful across the state of Texas. We'd love your input on how we can recruit and engage people as part of this effort. And we'll make sure to leave some time for Q&A at the end. So we're going to be using the Menti platform to get your input during this workshop. So this is a QR code on the right that you can point your phone or your tablet at just using the camera, and that should bring up the website, or you can just type in this web address here on the left, the www.menti.com. Then you'll look and see on the page there'll be a place to enter an 8-digit code. This is the code that we're going to be using for those. So you can always look at the top of every single slide in this webinar. It'll be a reference to that for you, so you can always see the web address and then the code that you need to enter to participate. And we'll have another reminder about this in a minute. So let's test this out just to see if this is working for everybody. And you can let us know what is blooming right now where you live. So again, you can go to that menti.com on your device, type in that code. And then once you type that in on your device, you should start to see the results coming in on your Zoom screen. All right, we got people typing in. Oh, we've got a lot of different things coming in so far. This is a word cloud, so it's going to be showing larger terms or larger names of species for things that people are repeatedly saying are blooming. So we've got Turk's cap, and this is fun because this is our second workshop that we've done. We did the same workshop on Wednesday, and so we can kind of David and I can kind of compare what we heard on Wednesday to what we are seeing today, and it's pretty similar so far. And then we can see how many people have reported. You can say multiple species too, so you should be able to type in multiple things. If you've already voted for
Yeah,
something, you can put in it again.
this is really exciting. Glad to have everybody participating. We're hoping this workshop will really get everyone an opportunity to plug in. So thank you.
If you have any technical problems with this, put that in the chat and
Yeah.
we'll try to help you sort that out too.
We've had a question about the code. The code will be at the top of the slide. So
Right up here.
Carol, be sure and look. Yeah, enter the number at the top of the slide. That number, that code will be the same for all of the presentation. So feel free to reference it at the top of the slides.
And sometimes Zoom can be a little tricky with that panel that'll pop up. So if you're not seeing something at the top, it might be because your Zoom panel is hiding it. So you can try to move that Zoom panel around if that's an issue. All right. This is excellent. We've got a lot of people that have
Yeah.
reported so far. All right, I'm going to move on to the next slide here. All right, so let's hear a little bit about who's in the crowd with us today.
Yeah, one of the things that we've tried to do, y'all, is because the registrant crowds from across Texas have been so robust and enthusiastic, we've tried to drop in a few little metrics about who's in the crowd that are joining us. Right now, we have over 100 people on this webinar. On Wednesday, we got up to over 180. So we're excited that there's so much enthusiasm in this process. We do want to share with you that we've got about 140 master naturalists on this call. We've got about 30 master gardeners, about 40 NIPSOT members, and 20 landscape designers. So the breadth and depth of the interested parties that have joined for this workshop and registered to participate are really exciting. We've also got over 15 zoos and botanic gardens represented on this particular call, 20 affiliates from Texas universities. 10 beekeepers are on this call. I think we had about 25 on Wednesday. So beekeepers are at the table. We're glad to have you. We also have about 10 monarch way station managers. And of course, monarchs and the helping with those pollinators are critical and a big part of our project. And then finally, we have about 25 ranch and property managers on this call as well. So we're extremely excited to have such a diverse group, and we welcome your participation as we move through the workshop this morning. Thank you.
Awesome. Okay, a reminder about the instructions before we move on if you missed this the first time. So feel free to get your camera app open, point it at that QR code, or enter the mentee.com address. And again, as we've been saying, this same code is going to be at the top of every slide. All right. Let's move on. All right. So the next poll, we would love your input and know where are you located in Texas? So on your device, you should have seen an advance from the what's blooming to this map slide. And on there, you can move that pin around and let us know where you are. We'd love to see what the distribution is today. And we won't reveal yet the most frequent state that we saw on Wednesday. We'll let you know after we see the results come in. We'll see how it stacks up. And on Wednesday, we also had some people from outside of Texas that kind of put their pin floating out in the white space.
Come on, West Texas. Wednesday
Yeah.
we had West Texas and El Paso even represented. So come on, if you're out in the western part of the state, please show us on the map. This is
Yeah.
great, y'all. This is
Yeah, this is
great.
excellent. It's
And,
definitely
and we're
different than
also,
Wednesday.
yeah. Just so everyone knows, on Wednesday, Austin really stomped us here in the Houston area. So we're glad to see that Houston is taking the lead right now. A lot of fun, a lot of fun. We have
Great.
over our participants on the call right now is over 100, so plenty of y'all to tell us where you're at.
Excellent. Yeah, can you remember, David, if we had anyone from North Texas on Wednesday? I know we had people in Central, but
We did. We had a
yeah.
pretty good showing, but Austin really, I think we had over at one point over 40 active participants on the call from just the Austin area.
All right, we'll give it
This
a
is great.
little more time
Yeah,
in case any
yeah.
last points come in. And again, if you're having any trouble with this, let us know in the chat and we'll help you
Yeah.
out. All right, last chance.
A lot of fun.
Okay.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah, thank you all for participating. Okay, so as you all know, as Texas residents, Texas is a really huge place and it's a very diverse place as well. So as represented on here, this is a map showing different ecosystems. This is just one way to look at this. There's a lot of different maps like this, kind of showing different ecosystems in different ways. But you can see on here just how many different kinds of ecosystems we have represented in this single state. So it's really exciting that there's so much diversity, but it also means that there's a lot of different stuff going on in terms of the plants and animals in the state, and lots of different changes that are happening across the state as well. So if we think about the changes that are coming to Texas in terms of the potential climate change impacts that are going to be happening, what we know so far from what scientists have been finding is temperatures are increasing. We're going to be probably seeing more extreme temperatures and also warmer winters. Generally, we're going to see decreasing precipitation. There's going to be overall fewer days with rain, but when the rain does happen, it'll be in heavier events, which can be potentially problematic. As any of you who have experienced flooding know, this can be a really big issue. The warmer temperatures can have a lot of different impacts on our natural environment, and we see a lot of those impacts reflected in the plants and animals that exist in the natural world. So one example is we see often with these these warmer temperatures, earlier first leaf and first bloom in different plants. We also can see that sometimes we have fewer fall springs, and what these are is when you have a really early increase in temperatures followed by a late season frost. And that, as you can imagine, can be problematic as well. If you imagine those first little tissues that are coming out, the tender little leaves and flower buds coming out on a plant in the springtime, if that's hit by a frost, it can potentially devastate the plant. It can cause it to have to leaf out again later. Sometimes it can't recover that year and have any more blooms, so that's kind of it for the blooming. So those can be pretty bad for the plant. So we're probably going to see fewer of those, which is a good thing. But there's also many other changes too that happen when you have those increasing winter temperatures, earlier springs. So when we talk about these seasonal events, all of you are probably familiar with those. You watch them happen every year. But you might not know that there's actually a scientific study that is devoted to these things, which is called phenology. And phenology is a term that it sounds very old-fashioned and kind of wonky, but it's something that I'm sure that all of you kind of understand. So the way that we defined it's the study of the timing of plant and animal seasonal events, and also their relationship with climate and other abiotic variables like the day length, or things like that. So you can think about phenology as the timing of when things first start in the springtime, when plants first leaf out, when plants bloom. It also has to do with when birds migrate, when insects emerge. And there's many applications of phenology, from helping us understand the timing and the severity of allergy season, thinking about when plants have their flowers and they're releasing their pollen, when is the peak amount of that happening, which is the most severe time of allergy season. Also things like wildfire risk, understanding, the early season green up of plants followed by the senescence or the brown down of plants when they dry out. When that happens can have really big implications for how severe a particular year is going to be with fire danger. Phenology has also been recognized as maybe the simplest process to track climate change. It's something that's very visible for everyone to observe. You can step outside and see phenology happening right where you live. And it's a very sensitive indicator of things that are happening. So if you think about, trying to understand whether a population of animals is impacted by climate change, it might be hard to detect that population decrease, but the really early signals might be there's mismatch happening. Maybe the plant and the pollinator is no longer in sync. And so by keeping track of the timing of those seasonal events, we can start to pick up on those changes that are happening, those mismatches that are happening, even before we see the further impact on the population. So it's a really critical tool for being able to understand these impacts. So we'd love to hear from you. What changes have you noticed where you live in Texas? What are the things that are of greatest concern to you? And so on your device now, you should see the slide has advanced again, and you should be able to type in a response. And if you'd like to type in more than one thing, you can do that as well. And then once people start responding in, we'll start seeing some things pop up on the screen here. So we're seeing more severe storms, heat, flooding, extremes. I'm seeing lots of extremes for sure. I know, especially recently, you all in the Houston area, you know all about that. Heavy rain and then no rain. Yeah. Less rain, but worse flooding. Trees losing leaves sooner and blooms earlier. Drought. Earlier bloom. So there's some differences here too. Some people are seeing earlier, going away earlier.
Yeah, the differences are really interesting. Oh,
Yeah, and we do have an El Paso person on here, so welcome.
yay! West Texas is represented.
Humidity. Uh-huh. Oak trees dying. I think someone commented on that on Wednesday as well. Increase in the amount of rain. Yeah, and the change in the landscape, and which has caused further flooding. This is great. Yeah, thank you for putting in all these responses. It's really interesting to hear about all these different changes. Still things coming in. Stress on large trees.
Yeah,
Leaves
Aaron,
browning earlier.
we've got a comment in the chat as to organisms actually their birthing cycles being off than what they had been previously recorded as. So
Yeah.
interesting as well. Also, very much phenology phenomena.
Feast or famine. Yeah, more comments about oaks. Oh, less butterflies. Earlier blooms. Birds panting. Oh, we see that here every year. It's hard to watch. All right. Well, thank you so much for all this input. So just to tell you a little bit more about kind of phenology and how we understand the impact of the environment on phenological events. There's lots of different ways that we call them abiotic variables, different things can impact phenology, like flowering. So if you think about when a plant flowers, it might be cued or kind of driven by warmth, the amount of temperature that started since the beginning of the year. In more temperate areas, like in the Northeast, there might actually have to be a winter chill that happens first, which makes it even more complicated. There's kind of a equation that the plant has where it kind of keeps track of what's happened so far to know when to start going in the springtime. It doesn't want to leaf out too early because if it starts getting warm, but it's maybe only in January, there might be another freeze coming. So sometimes it has to accumulate enough chill first before it starts responding to that warmth. Freeze events can also play a role. In places like Texas, where it's more water limited, rainfall can be a huge cue. We see that here in Tucson as well. You know, sometimes we'll get a rainfall event, and then within a few days, we have plants that are leafing out and trying to take advantage of that. And then also day length. This can be really important in southern areas as well, where maybe the temperature doesn't change as much, but that day length can be a cue that the days are getting longer. It's time to start initiating activity in the springtime. Thinking about it from the pollinator perspective, those cues can be quite different sometimes. Thinking about the local pollinators that might be, the residents, they might be cued by things like the temperature increasing and the rainfall. But if you think about migrating pollinators like the monarch butterfly, they don't know what those conditions are at the northern locations that they're traveling to. So they might have to be thinking about what are the conditions in the place that I'm at in my winter breeding ground or my winter grounds. Or they might be thinking about, oh, what's the day length here? Is it going to be getting longer? That's going to be my cue to start going forward. A lot of birds use that as well to know that it's time to start migrating north. And they might not know what the conditions are further north, so they might have to be adapting as they travel to what the conditions are. This is a graphic from the recent National Climate Assessment showing just some of the changes that we've already found so far, the shifts that are already happening in phenology of different plants and animals. This map actually shows both range shifts in red, which is where animals and plants are actually shifting where they live, where they're able to live because of the conditions that they're adapted to and where they can now exist because of how those conditions have changed. And then in the blue, those are examples of how the phenology has actually shifted. So we're seeing both advancement and delay, depending on what species we're talking about. In some places, like in the southeast, we're seeing an advancement in when plants flower. In other places, we're seeing a delay in things like frog hibernation or black bear hibernation, where that's happening later, mostly because the temperatures are increasing, so it's a longer season. They can be out for longer. In Texas, they are showing that the main thing they found is an increase in, a change in range in terms of the elevation. So birds moving upslope in higher areas to kind of access those areas that are more suitable in these warmer conditions. Focusing in on plants in particular, this was a paper that came out several years ago now that actually used data from the USA-NPN through our Nature's Notebook platform, looking at common milkweed flowering. And this author found that flowering has actually shifted, and it's about 7 or a week earlier per degree of Fahrenheit increase. So every time you have an increase in 1 degree, we're seeing a week earlier flowering. It's also pretty flexible. So the author found that it's not consistently increasing. It really does depend. So in years where it's a colder spring, it's still going to be later, but then in years where it's really warm, it's a lot earlier. He also found, interestingly, that it's only flowering that seems to be shifting. The initial growth of the leaves of that plant and the seed ripening is not shifting at that same rate. So even within a species that's shifting, it might not be the same across all the different life cycle stages. So it's all very complicated in how things are changing. This is kind of a summary of some different scientific papers that have looked at how things are shifting in terms of plants and pollinators. Overall, the most consistent pattern is that flowering and pollinator activity is generally shifting earlier. But there are some exceptions to that. In some cases, the pollinators are shifting earlier, but the flowering timing is not changing. And so that, as you can imagine, will be problematic. If the pollinators are there, but the flowers aren't open, there's not an opportunity for them to pollinate, and the pollinators don't have food as well. So it's kind of unknown yet what the impact will be on those pollinators. So we'd love to hear from you again now. How do you anticipate these changes are going to impact the species in Texas that you care about? We'd love to hear about the kind of things that you're thinking about in terms of the impacts on pollinators and pollinator plants. Loss of diversity, for sure. Things becoming more threatened. Decrease in populations. Yeah, a lot of people worried about decreases. Loss of nectar. Yeah, mismatch, especially on the southbound migration. Decline in bay population. We need more diversity. Yeah, other insects moving in, new insects that we might not have seen before, maybe new plants as well. Smaller populations, new species. Yeah, these mismatches, a lot of people talking about those. Yeah, unpredictable weather will favor invasive species. That's a great point. Invasive species, they're invasive for a reason, right? They're very able to adapt and take advantage of different situations. So they're often kind of the winners when it comes to climate change impacts. The need to increase production of urban diversity, allowing for more corridor planting. I like that. Plant more types of cacti. I like that, El Paso.
Yeah. Great input, y'all. Really, really good, thoughtful input.
Yes, and we will be summarizing all of these responses too and combining them with the responses from Wednesday's session and then sending that around.
Also, y'all, I know there are a number of you that are struggling to get the voting part of the presentation to work. Feel free to leave that input in the chat, and that way we will capture it so that as we synopsize both of these workshops, we'll be able to capture your input as well.
Yeah, thank you so much. All right, let's move on here. So let's kind of transition to talking about pollinator restoration. So people that are working on restoration, they do face a lot of different challenges. Maybe the most obvious is what should I plant? What plant should I put in to support the pollinators that I care about? Also, when should I collect seeds? This is particularly important if you're trying to plant seeds from maybe a local area, seeds that are adapted to an area. What's the best time to get out there and get those seeds? You might be interested in specific timing of what species are going to provide bloom, say in the summer or in a particular season that'll support a pollinator you care about. You might be wondering what species are actually becoming mismatched, which one should I be worrying about? Maybe what species are resilient to drought, thinking about, future warming, less precipitation. How can I plant plants that are adapted? And then maybe you're thinking about, well, maybe will near natives perform better? Plants that are adapted further south or maybe at a lower elevation, maybe those will be better suited to a future climate. So the bottom line with all of these questions that we have is we really need more data. We don't have much information about flowering and seed production timing in Texas or even in the region. It's really lacking. So that's one of the major objectives of this project is to try to get more information about when plants are flowering, when they're putting out their seeds, so that we can assist in pollinator restoration. And there's, like, as we were saying before, Texas is so diverse. There's so many species there. Even when we're just looking at nectar plants, that we need to narrow down the list if we're going to try to focus on what species we want to plant. So we would love for you all to be part of that effort in trying to help us decide what should we focus on. So I'm going to pass it to David.
Yeah. And as anyone who spent any time in Texas knows, there is no perfect answers for any one part of the state. And so our best attempt over a number of months to try to develop a list involved going to a number of our partners and really asking for their resources so that we could build on what they had already done as we kind of set out to make a proposed target species list for this time to restore project. So the three big partners that we went to, we also went to a couple more, but the three big ones, we started with the plant list that NIPSOT has developed for each of the ecoregions. And I know many of y'all use those plant lists when you're working on your own native gardens or wildscapes. And so we started with those. We pulled the plant list from the ecoregions of the most populous parts of the state. So if you think of the Big Triangle, Dallas, Houston, over to San Antonio, then up to Austin and back to Dallas. Those were the three, kind of points of the triangle that we were really trying to focus plant list with the Lady Bird Johnson Wildlife Center's plant database, because they had some very specific data around those that we were trying to also capture as part of this project as we moved forward. in a tool that you're going to learn a little bit more about called Nature's Notebook here in a minute. And then also did a cross-referencing with the Xerces Society, which is a conservation society for invertebrates. And you'll see how that played out in the data. I'm about to show you a slide that will show you how we've kind of tried to represent this cross-referencing to help you kind of make informed decisions as we attempt to get a priority species list. Our goal was to try to keep the list manageable, but we wanted to make sure we had a list that gave you enough opportunity to have input on which species worked for you. Please keep in mind that we're looking for a list that's very pollinator focused. We're looking for species that are relatively widely distributed. We know that that's a tall order for Texas, but we want them to work in more than one ecoregion. So a species that only works in the hill country is problematic for us because of the Gulf Coast and North Texas and the Valley. So keep that in mind. And then we're also looking for species that are recognized as important, both in terms of nectar, but also in terms of plants that support biodiversity in general. And so that was kind of our initial attempt to try to build a list. And I'm about to share with you a list, but I have one more slide, Erin, if you will.
Oops. Oh, that wasn't it.
There it is. There it is.
Okay.
We got one more, I think.
Oh, it jumped
Or is it? It's after this. Okay.
Okay.
No problem. If we can go back one.
Oh, is it
this? One more.
Yeah, I think
perfect. Now I'm going to apologize on the front. Oh.
Yeah, I don't know if it's missing, but let's see.
I think it's after these the spreadsheets. You're okay. If we can go to this one right here.
Oh. The spreadsheet?
Yes, this is the full spreadsheet.
Okay, got it.
Thank you.
Sorry,
guys, I'm going to apologize that this is a very difficult spreadsheet to read. And so I've broken it up so that we can look at it a little closer so that you can see it. But what this spreadsheet represents is a listing of 38 species of plants that have gone through that vetting process where we took the NIPSOT plant list for ecoregions and then cross-referenced it to both the Xerces Society as well as the Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center to try to find commonality that supported our overall Time to Restore project. Erin, why don't we advance one so that I can zoom in and look at the 8 species. These 8 species, and Erin's going to talk to you in a little bit about kind of how these 8 species came to be, but these are the 8 species that were originally identified in the other 3 states as part of the study. So it's Louisiana, New Mexico, and Arizona. We're going to be asking y'all to consider moving these species forward. I'll let Erin talk about that in a minute, but I wanted to bring this up so that you can kind of see the data that we were synthesizing as we brought all of the other 30 species forward. The first column obviously is the common name. The second column is the Latin name of the species, so that we hopefully don't get into any problems with that. I also identified, working off of all 3 resources, what the distribution was. So we were looking for species that are widely distributed. Another big component of Time to Restore is we're looking for a very diverse bloom season so that you have, as you're monitoring and collecting data for the Time to Restore project, you're able to focus on different parts of the year as those species come into bloom and then set seed and fruit. I also have identified if that species has been identified by the Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center as an important nectar source. So that's what the Y represents in that next column. The SVTNB column, and many of you may find this a bit interesting, is how important is this plant to bees? NB stands for native bees, BB stands for bumblebees, and then HB stands for honeybees. So you can see the first 8 species that have been used in the other 3 states has already very much been focused on species that are critical for native bee species and honeybees, which are not native, but a key participant in the pollinator process. You're also going to see a column that shows nesting. There are 2 plant species, and we may even turn this into a bit of a contest when we advance the slide here. There are 2 plant species that are on our list that are not only important for nectar, but also provide nesting materials and are critical in that role. The next column is SCBC. That column stands for Supports Conservation Biological Control. And these are plant species that attract natural predators that assist in the furtherance of pollinator restoration projects. So you'll notice like one of the key groups for in this particular category are the milkweeds. The milkweeds all attract predatory insects that then help with natural pest control. And then the last column, which is not really critical right here, is the column that identifies whether that species is already in nature's notebook, which is a major tool for us as we collect data for this particular project. Okay, Erin, if you'll move forward one. Thank you. This is the 30 new species that we're proposing for your consideration. So here in a minute, Erin's going to cue this up, and we are going to vote on all of these species to see if we can get your input into which one should make it onto a priority target species list for the state of Texas. I know it's not perfect, and keep in mind, y'all, you're not trying to embrace a perfect 100% list. What you're looking for is a core group of species that in your particular part of Texas will help in furthering data as it relates to seasonal change, flowering time, and seed and fruit production. So keep that in mind. You're not looking for a perfect list, but you're looking for a handful of species that you think are very representative of your area and that will work as you participate and actively promote this project, okay? So keep in mind the data that we pointed. I did put there are two species in here just to kind of get us, make sure y'all are all paying attention. There are two species on this list that actually are important for nesting behavior. One is the eastern redbud, and the other is the actual Texas thistle. For just out of fun, if you want to drop into the chat if you know what those species are important in terms of the groups that nesting material are critical for, and we'll try to answer that question as we move through this. Erin, if you will, move forward. Okay, so as we move into the voting process, please be mindful. We're trying to get a Texas species list that works, that builds on our partners' efforts thus far, which is the synthesis that we've done, includes species that are fairly easy to identify and record change. Now, y'all probably recognize on that list, there are some species that determining when seed is set is very important. One of them is coralberry. For any of y'all that know coralberry very well, it's very difficult without destroying the flower to figure out whether it's about to set seed. So keep that in mind as we're looking for species that are very useful and easy to record change, because that's going to help us collect data as part of this project. We're also looking for species that are widely distributed. We know that species that work in North Texas may or may not work in the Valley, and vice versa. Those that work here on the Gulf Coast probably don't work well in El Paso. So keep that in mind. We're looking for wide kind of general rules around applicability, okay? And looking for species that are widely distributed without having to be representative of the entire state. And last, we're looking for your input as practitioners in the field as to what's most important out there in making sense of what we're trying to do. We want species that make sense for you and that make sense for our study. So thank you with that. And now I'll turn it back to Erin.
Thank you. So we haven't really talked about this part yet, but the Time to Restore project is a regional project. It's actually, we started the project back in 2021 in New Mexico, Oklahoma, and Louisiana. This is a project that was funded by the South Central Climate Adaptation Science Center, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a bit. But they have what's called the South Central region, which includes these 3 states plus Texas. And when we started the project in 2021, we didn't feel like we had enough capacity to bring in Texas at that point. We wanted to do this project and do it well. And we knew that Texas was just so big and it would just be really difficult to be able to succeed here. So we started out with just the 3 smaller states, and we did workshops similar to this to try to determine what are the species you want to try to focus on for data collection. and really try to narrow down to a small list because if you think about, people trying to do data collection, if we just open it up and it's every single species you could ever want, we'll end up with a little bit of data on a lot of species, which doesn't really help us much for doing phenology and trying to do data analysis where we're trying to figure out how things are changing, what's the implication of climate change, how does it impact the flowering of species. We need to have a lot of data on a fewer number of species. So we worked through this process. We came up with this short list of 8 species. So we're proposing to move that into the Texas list because we'd like to have some consistency throughout the project to be able to have 8 shared species. And because you guys, Texas is so much bigger, you get additional species too. But we'll start with these 8 unless anyone has a big issue. And you can put in the chat if you feel like any of these species are potentially problematic for reasons around, I feel like this species is maybe potentially invasive, or it's going to like crowd out other species, or it's not going to do well in my area. Keep in mind that it doesn't have to be a species that is for your exact location, but if you feel like it's a problem for other species, then let us know about that. But otherwise, we're going to be moving this list in.
Aaron?
Mhm.
Can we back up to the spreadsheet? There were some couple of questions that came up in the Q of A that may actually be helpful before we move to the voting, if I can answer
Sure.
those real quickly.
Mhm.
So one of the questions that came up in the Q&A was explaining the abbreviations for distribution. The distribution is actually just the initials of the 4 states involved in the Time to Restore project, which is Texas, which is T, New Mexico, NM, Oklahoma, which is O, and then Louisiana, which is L. Those were the abbreviations that were used. We tried, and I'll just share this with you, when we were going through and building the list, we tried to get species that had at least 2 states represented. We tried to avoid plants that would only be found in Texas because we were trying to get that symbiotic relationship between all 4 states in the South Central region. We also had another question about the plant list, asking for the link. Keep in mind, y'all, everyone on this call will get a final priority species list. We're hopeful in the next week, 2 weeks, after both workshops have completed, that we're able to synthesize that information and get you a final plant list. We don't know exactly how many species will be on that final list, but we're hoping for something in around the 25 species list so that it covers the widest part of Texas. And then I think the one of the other questions was, what does the O stand for? That was Oklahoma in the list. And then another question Melanie brought up was about the whole issue of, do these need to be species that are natively occurring or in our garden? We're looking for species that are native and would be found in the natural environment, but we recognize that a lot of our project participants will be working in their own individual native gardens and wildscapes. So we're looking for something that does both, Melanie, so hopefully that will help. Aaron, back to you.
Thank you. Okay, so again, these you've already seen these, but these are the species that we're going to be considering on the next slide, which is another poll. So any last things to say about this, David, before we move to the poll?
No. This list, y'all, we've tried to identify the Latin names so that you have both the Latin name, because we do recognize that regional variation does, we found this out on Wednesday, does play into common name differences. I do need probably to go ahead and point out, we had this issue come up on Wednesday. Y'all, a golden crown beard is a common name that most of Texas knows as cowpen daisy. So feel free to, if you see one of those and have a question about whether that has a different common name, feel free to ask us before you vote it. Back to you, Aaron.
All right, so the way that this, oh, we don't need that one. Okay, we're not gonna do that. The way that this voting works is this is what's called a 100 points poll. So on your device, you will see a very long list of these 30 species sorted alphabetically by common name. You have 100 points to spend on these species, and you can do that in any way you'd like. You can give between 1 and 100 points to any of these species. So if there's one you really like, you can give it 100. If you want to kind of divide up your points between all species, you could just give each one a couple points. So it's up to you. We're going to give a little bit of time for this because it will take you a little bit to get through the list. If you have any issues, please let us know. If you're not able to use the voting, we are planning to have this in a follow-up email as an additional survey. So you'll be able to vote that way too if you aren't able to do that today. There are 30 on this list. So we're trying to narrow this down. I think 30 plus the 8 that we're moving in from the regional list is a bit long. So we are trying to reduce. So we're going to see kind of what falls out. It's not priority. What are the ones that are really important for you all here, the people on Wednesday, and then a few more people that will have voting over email as well.
Yeah, and y'all, we apologize for the small print. It's a limitation of the software, but we wanted to give you as many choices as possible. Keep in mind, you're not looking for a perfect list. What you're looking for are a handful of species that you feel very comfortable about in terms of being able to collect data on a regular basis and report into the project. Remember, trying to keep your arms around 30 species is just not doable for any of us in our very busy lives. But a few key species, we want to make sure you get those identified in this process.
So if anyone's having difficulty, you're not going to be able to do anything on the Zoom screen. You're going to go back to your device and you're going to, hopefully it'll have advanced. If it hasn't, I would try to go back to menti.com and put in this code again, see if that'll refresh it. And then on your mobile device, then you should see in a list with the ability to put the amount of points next to it, how you can vote. And make sure you scroll down because it's a long list. You're only going to see a couple on your first screen. So you can go down to the bottom, and then once you get all the way down to the bottom, there'll be a submit once you're done. And so that will send in your results that we'll be seeing on the screen here on the Zoom.
And I know a number of you have just seen a glitch that I just noticed. Often you have to advance. You can hit next slide, and that will move it forward to this voting slide. So if you're not seeing this slide, that may be also the issue.
And we know that it's hard to see this on the Zoom screen right now to see the results. And I think we have maxed out this particular poll. They told us we can't add any more. And they also told us, we advise you to not have so many choices because it's going to be really hard for people to see. But we want to have as many choices for you all as possible. So we'll be summarizing this and sending it around in a way that's easier to view.
Yeah. Just make sure you get the species that are critical for you, your points associated with them, because when we leave the workshop, we will capture that input, and that input's most critical for us in getting to that final list of target species for the state. A question came up, and I'll go ahead and answer this for the benefit of all right now. A question came up about species that are not the species we're talking about, but could very easily drift. There's another species that's closely related that works and performs very similarly. We're asking that we stay focused on the species that will be on the target list, because those are the ones that are going to show up in Nature's Notebook, which is the tool that you'll be using to report your data. So try to stay really focused on those species that you know will perform well in your area, or that you can find in a natural area in your area that you would like to monitor.
Yeah, and someone asked about the chart too. So it's showing you basically what percent of the total points each of these species has received so far. So they're all very squished on here, but the top one it looks like is Turk's cap has 10%. So you can kind of see how things are falling out. And I'm sorry for the folks that aren't able to do this. I think there's some limitations with certain types of phones too, where I think we had that trouble on Wednesday where it doesn't seem like it supports this.
Yeah, one of the things, we'll go ahead and share this with you, y'all. If you're having some problems with your phone, it may be worth clicking into another browser. Sometimes the browser is the issue. It just depends on how current your computer is. I know there were a couple of glitches around that. We are committed to capturing your input. So if you do not get to do this, be sure and send Aaron and I, or one of us, an email afterwards with your input, we will make sure you become part of this. We are that committed to making sure this workshop is reflective of the work for everyone who's invested their time and effort in this process.
Yes, and if on the final list your favorite species doesn't make it on there, it doesn't mean you can't still record that if you'd like to, if it's on the Nature's Notebook list. What we're trying to do is focus the big effort in Texas on a fewer number of species. So when we're kind of promoting the project, and telling people, get involved, we're really trying to focus on these species. That's the list we're going to be using. All right, let's give it a little more time. We do have, it looks like about 52 people have, we're still at 53, so they're still coming in. We'll give it a little more time.
We've got 105 on the call right now, so please vote if you can. If you can't, be sure and get those important species to us in an email, and we'll make sure it gets recorded as part of this workshop.
Are there any other questions
This is great, y'all.
Yeah. Any other questions that we could answer now? I'm just going back.
Yeah.
There's a lot of stuff in the chat.
Yeah. Lots of, be sure, y'all, and I'll remind everyone, if you've got a question, particularly a question, if you think it would be beneficial for other members on the workshop, please post those into the Q&A so that I can monitor and track them. We're going to be sending those questions and answers out to the entire participant list for both workshops. So that's really important. So if you can add them there. If you've added a question in the chat, but it would be better in the Q&A, please put them in the Q&A because that's the one I'm able to monitor right now. And we want to try to make sure everybody on the call gets an answer as quickly and as efficiently as possible. This is great, y'all. I can't tell you, Wednesday was our first time to try to do this. And we had a lot of professionals tell us that this was pretty brave of us to. We should also share with you on Wednesday, we had 180 people on the call. So we had a really large group trying to kind of fix this and figure this out as we went. It's going much smoother today, so I'm very happy about that. And thank y'all for bearing with us and having patience as we tried to make this as participatory as possible. Your input does matter, and it does make a difference.
Yeah, we've had a couple questions also about wondering about the impact of growing plants in gardens or places where you're watering them or you're putting fertilizer or other kind of things that are not natural. And we do have a way to indicate that in Nature's Notebook. So we're definitely inviting people both in natural areas and in maintained garden areas to participate as part of this. When you register a plant in our Nature's Notebook platform, there's a whole bunch of questions that you will answer about your plant and whether it receives supplemental water or fertilizer, the shade status. You can indicate other things about your site, kind of like how urban is it? Are you close to a road? Are you close to a body of water? So there's a lot of stuff that will go into your site and your plant. And so that'll be associated with all of your data. So that's a great question. It definitely impacts phenology if you're giving your plant extra water.
Very, absolutely.
All right, should we move on? I know we didn't get everybody, but we will send this out in an email format, not this format, a Google form, so it'll be easier.
Aaron, before we do that, Lynn asked in the Q&A, like we said before, if for some reason you haven't been able to vote, please send us that under those same kind of parameters via email, either Aaron or I or both of us, your preferences in terms of the species that are most critical to you, and we will get them worked into this effort, okay? Thank you. Just do it via email. And at the very end of this workshop, we will provide the email, or you can send it to the email that was on the original flyer for this workshop. Either way, we'll get it. Thank you, Aaron.
Great. Okay, so we did just talk about this, but just to sum up, so we are going to be sorting through this list, the one from Wednesday. We're going to be sending out an email with another survey opportunity, send us your thoughts by email if you didn't have the chance to participate in the voting. In the next week or two, we're going to be sending around all of these results along with the Q&A and all the results from the other polls. So once we have a short list for Texas, that's when we're really going to start in our efforts to try to get people starting to collect data as part of this project. So look out for future communications from us about that. Okay, we're going to switch gears a little bit, and now we would love to hear about how do you get information? If you're thinking about what you're going to plant for pollinators, what are the resources that you typically use? Do you already have, maybe you don't have a good source yet? Do you already have places that you kind of are your go-to places for knowing about what species to pick for pollinators? So we have plant nurseries or garden centers, NIPSOT, AgriLife, which encompasses the Master Naturalist, internet or digital research, a public or personal library, maybe friends or family, or maybe you don't have a source yet.
Oh, this is great, y'all. This is great. Yeah. We were very concerned as we were on Wednesday that there might be a real absence of information. But it looks like many of you, as industrious as you are, I know it's in the Texas blood, have figured out ways to get information, and this will be really critical as we go through the process and start to do output in terms of our deliverables.
I see we do have a raised hand. We have Sandra. Would you like to say something? I'm going to unmute you, Sandra Williams. Do you have something you'd like to add? Okay, maybe it was a mistake. Feel free to put in the chat if you have a question too, if you can't speak.
We're having, I noticed in the chat, people are identifying that Menti is not working. Keep in mind, y'all, if it stalls, you need to refresh. Just refresh your screen and it'll start to work again. And you may need to just do advanced slide because if Aaron moves on before you're ready to go, it will prompt you at the very top to hit that button to advance the slides.
Yep, you can always close out your browser in your mobile app too and just restart this process. Go back to your browser, open menti.com, type in that code at the top again. Well, it looks like NIPSOT, AgriLife, or similar is coming out on top, but we have a lot of people that use the internet and digital research as well. That's pretty similar to what folks said on Wednesday, I think.
Yeah, very, very similar. So that really excited to hear. It's very common across Texas.
I'm going to move forward. So if you are familiar with looking at resources on what to plant, you might have seen something similar to this, which is what's called a bloom calendar or a planting palette. This one is showing a bunch of plants on the left-hand side here, and then which seasons you might see blooming happening for these plants. So you can see on here the kind of the color of the plant as well as the little symbols indicate when the bloom time is happening. And so the ways that you might use something like this is you might be interested in planting different colors of flowers. So you might use it for that reason. You might be using it to try to make sure that you have blooms or nectar available during all seasons for your pollinators. So maybe you want to make sure you have a little symbol for each of these seasons of the year. Maybe there's a particular pollinator that you're interested in. Maybe you're really interested in monarch conservation and you want to try to support that species. So maybe you're focusing on the spring and the fall blooming to try to make sure that you're supporting that species when it's moving through your area. So lots of different ways to use this calendar, but there are some limitations as well. So one of the things about these calendars is they're often created for a pretty large area. It might be a region of the United States. If you're lucky, you might find one for an ecoregion or a state, but they're often not going to tell you very many specifics about when blooming is going to happen in your particular area. They might also be pretty coarse in terms of the seasons, where spring is, 3 months long. It might be that you want to know more specifically within that when the blooming is happening. And then maybe most importantly, this calendar doesn't include the impacts of climate change and how flowering timing might shift under future climate conditions. So that's really one of the inspirations for this Time to Restore project is being able to address these kinds of limitations. So the Time to Restore project, as I mentioned, we started this project back in 2021. We received funding for this project by the South Central Climate Adaptation Science Center, which is a part of the U.S. Geological Survey, and it covers the states in orange here, New Mexico, Texas, Oklahoma, and Louisiana. One of the main inspirations for this project was our partners at the Tribal Alliance for Pollinators, particularly Jane Breckenridge, who also is the director of the UT Butterfly Farm in Oklahoma. And they deal with a lot of trying to do pollinator restoration across the state and beyond. They try to assist tribes with being able to do this conservation, and they do a lot of planting of native seeds. And so they're trying to find these native seeds. They're trying to know when to go out to the different collection areas, and they don't have a lot of information about when seeds are ripe. And they also are concerned about climate change impacts. They're concerned about how the blooming timing of the plants that they're trying to raise and distribute is going to be shifting under future conditions. So we started talking with them about this and realized there's really not a lot of data in the States here about when flowering is happening and when seed timing is happening. So we gathered together a whole bunch of other collaborators. We also started bringing in folks from the Bosque Ecosystem Monitoring Program, which is associated with the University of New Mexico. We brought in our Rio Grande Phenology Trail partners who are also in New Mexico. We brought in our Gulf Coast Phenology Trail partners based in Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama to kind of all come together to try to get more data on these species, nectar species across these 4 states. And so those of us at the USA National Phenology Network are trying to help kind of lead the project, maintain the data collection platform, do the data summary, and produce the results. But we really rely on all of these great partners. Just to give you a little bit of background about the NPN, we were started back in 2007, really understanding that phenology is this great tool to help understand climate change impacts, but we don't have a lot of standardized data collection to try to collect phenology data. So we started the Nature's Notebook platform back then, and we've been running that across the United States. We have about 4,000 people that collect data each year, and that's always growing. And we're really trying to collect information that will help inform people about what they need to make decisions like what to plant or how to manage invasive species or understand which species are being the most impacted by climate change. I do want to mention also we have several other really great collaborators as part of the Time to Restore project. We are working with Rob Kroll with the Great Lakes Indian Fish and Wildlife Commission, who's based in Wisconsin. He is serving as our data sovereignty advisor. We want to make sure as we're doing collaboration as part of this project, we're very interested in working with tribal partners and pueblos in New Mexico, but we want to make sure that we're approaching this in a way that respects tribal data sovereignty. So we're really lucky to have him as an advisor on this project. We also have people with the National Wildlife Federation in Texas working with us, and then also with the Botanical Research Institute of Texas. Really big, important component of this project is pulling in data from herbaria, which are collections of plants that we can use to understand historical plant data. We just started this project in 2021, and so that's a pretty short time period to try to understand phenology and climate change impacts. So by bringing in data from decades before, it's a really important supplement. So that's a really exciting part of this project as well. So the main questions that we're trying to address with the Time to Restore project, we're really interested in serving as kind of a way to link people together across the states and across the region. One of the things we recognized in our early workshops in 2021 is a lot of people don't know other people that are working on pollinator restoration, even in their state. And so we run these quarterly calls every 3 months where we try to just offer a space for people to talk to each other. So these are pretty open. We will bring some updates about the project and kind of where we're at, anything that's kind of new and exciting to share. But we make space for people to ask questions of each other, to share resources, events, maybe requests. We've had people in the past say like, I have some land and I have a lot of plants and they go to seed and I would love to have people come and collect seeds if you're interested. And then we've had other people, like an educator who says, I have students and I'd love to take them on a field trip. Is there anyone that has a place where I could take them and teach them about native plants? So we're trying to kind of create that space for collaborative opportunities. We're also trying to help link people with resources. So it was really great to see that you all have a good understanding of what to plant. Where should I go to figure out what to plant? A lot of people don't have that. So we're trying to make sure that we're sharing resources. We have a resources spreadsheet available where we're kind of like keeping track of different resources that people use. So that's another thing as part of this project. Then we're also trying to answer these particular questions, like how do I select plants that are going to support pollinators at different times of the year? So that is a major driver of this project. Also, when should I harvest seeds? We've talked about that a bit. So when should I go out to do that at the most effective time so I'm not going out to this area that it took me 2 hours to drive to and then there's nothing that's ripe yet. Try to make that more efficient. And then how will bloom and seed times shift with climate change is a major question as well. So this is kind of an overview of our process. We really wanted to take an approach to this project where we get input at every stage. So we don't want to just be behind the scenes kind of doing everything on our own and then at the end of the 3 years come out and say, here you go, here's the thing that we made. So our process is one, you might have heard the term co-production, where we're trying to create the project with the people that are going to be using the information at the end. So there's different ways we're doing this. You're in one today. This workshop is getting your input on the priority species, how we can best do engagement, the deliverables. We're also going to be asking for your assistance in collecting the data and also helping us find other data collectors that can help get more information. We also want to get more of your input as we develop these preliminary results, as we're coming out with these models that are predicting the shift in climate change or shift in flowering timing due to climate change. And then at the end, we'll want to get your feedback on those products that we come out with to make sure that they're the most useful for you. And for these 3 stages here, really the mechanism for doing that is through the quarterly calls. So we're going to be sending you invitations to those calls going forward, and you're welcome to join us for those. They're fairly informal, as I said, they're about an hour long, so you're welcome to join those. And we'll also send out kind of email updates about what happened in the quarterly calls to the email list as well. And then in terms of what the outputs look like, this is just an example of one of the info sheets that we developed last year. It was kind of the end of the first phase of the project where we had started up the project in the other 3 states. We had some data to share and we wanted to get input on what this might look like. So basically what we had is a series of these calendars. These are ways to look at when flowering and when seed timing is happening. We got lots of input from people about what these calendars should look like. We're going to keep getting input on those from you all. And so it kind of shows you by looking at this calendar across the year, the darker orange colors indicate when more people were saying, yes, I see open flowers, and then the same thing for ripe seeds. So that's the basis of the calendar. And then on the right, we have information about, based on some models that we did, based on projection information about how climate's going to change in the region, how we predict flowering and seed time is going to shift by the middle of the century, by this period of 2036 to 2065. So that's the kind of information we're going to deliver. It might look a little bit differently based on your input, but just to kind of show you where we're going with the project, that's really the goal. So we'd like to take a little bit of time now to get some of your input on these deliverables, these kind of outcomes of the project. So we're going to be asking you about what aspects of flowering and seeding are most useful to you, and then also about how you kind of think it's what's more intuitive in terms of looking at the data and visualizing it. So before we launch another poll here, to give you a little bit more information about phenological measurements, we're going to be asking you about, do you feel like the start of flowering is important? That can tell us about when the first nectar is available for pollinators. Because this is kind of the first thing that happens in a plant, it can be the most sensitive of these different metrics to climate change. Often we're seeing the most shift in when the thing starts happening. We're also interested in the peak in flowering and also seed timing. So when is the most nectar available on a plant, or when are the most ripe seeds available? The duration, how long is that season, and is that um, different for different plants? And then the variability, how much does something like the start of flowering change from year to year in a particular species? So here is another poll for you. So if you're on your device, you might have to advance to the next slide, or it might be showing this. But let us know, and you can pick all of these if you want, or just some of them. But which of these would you be most interested in knowing more about for the species that you care about? Looks like we might also have another raised hand, which we could get to now. We have Martha Richson. Would you like to say something?
No, sorry. I was just
Okay.
trying to lower the hand that was on my screen.
Oh, no worries. We can do that for you. I will lower
Thank
your
you.
hand. Thank you.
Aaron, we've had a question in the slide in the Q&A that might be a good time to answer while people are voting.
Okay.
The questioner asked, "What is tribal data sovereignty?"
Yeah, that's a great question. So that is the idea that tribes have some concerns over data becoming publicly available. So many tribes have plants and animals and other aspects of the environment that are culturally sensitive. They might be of particular importance due to their, cultural reasons. They might be a plant that they use for basketry or another purpose. And we want to make sure that if those data are collected, they're not necessarily going to be visible to everyone. So they may want to limit the data sharing that happens there. And so when we approach different tribal partners, we do it in a way where we're inviting them to participate in the project if they'd like to, but we're not saying if you participate, you must collect data through our Nature's Notebook platform, and the data will become publicly available to everyone. What we're trying to do is offer different options for doing data collection where they can maintain their own data and kind of have ownership over that. So that's really the concern there. Another aspect of that is has to do with seed collection as well. So when we start producing information about when seeds may be ripe for different species, we don't want to necessarily be encouraging people to go out and collect all the seeds they can. You can tell how that would be problematic. There may be species that are, have limited populations. We don't want people to overharvest. And we especially don't want people to go out to others' lands where they don't have permission to do data collection, or sorry, seed collection, or data collection, really. And so we're trying to just keep that in mind, be very aware of those concerns. And so we have our advisor on that who's helping us think through, the best language for that, how to approach different tribal partners. So it
Thank
looks
you.
like we've had, oh, go ahead, David. Do you have
Yeah.
something?
Well, we had another question pop up, and while if you're ready to go forward, we can wait till the next pause to answer it. Go ahead, Aaron.
Okay, yeah, maybe we'll move to the next one. So it looks like duration came out slightly on top. I think that was the case on Wednesday as well.
Yeah.
Although I think
Yeah.
more of you are saying that the start of flowering and the variability are important than the folks did on Wednesday. So thank you for your input on that. And now a question about the seed timing. So it's same questions, but for seeds now, what are your highest interests in this area? And then we could get to that other question too.
Yeah. Aaron, we had a question from Amanda that asked about frog fruit. And yes, frog fruit as a potential species on the target list. And that issue came up on Wednesday, just for everyone's benefit. It came up on Wednesday. The challenge we have with frog fruit, and I think everybody knows this, being able to measure and collect data based on flower and particularly seed production is extremely difficult. In fact, it's one of those species where you have to kind of get down there and really get close. It's not easily observed. And because of that issue, we didn't put it on this list, even though we recognize that for many species, it's incredibly important and very valuable in many wildscapes and naturally occurring as well. But Amanda, I will add this. If you feel like it's a really important one and it should be on this list, please send us your input. We are going to take everybody's input extremely serious as we build this final target species list. The other thing, if we've still got time, Aaron, do we still have a little bit of time?
Sure,
I
we've
wanted
got,
to go
50
back
people
to,
so far. So,
yeah, okay. So keep voting, y'all. This is important input here because this is going to tell us how to build those deliverables. So please vote if you can. If you can't, send us an email so that we get that input in this process. I just wanted to go back to that target species list. If you remember, there were 2 species on the plant list that are important for nesting of pollinators. One was the eastern redbud and the other was the Texas thistle. Did anybody come up with the groups of organisms that those are really important to? Let me check the chat just to see. I don't see anybody putting in there.
I know that here in Tucson, the leafcutter bees love redbuds here.
Yes,
So.
yes, yeah, exactly. It's the leafcutter bees. So if you know, just as an FYI, public service announcement for the native tree or the official tree of my home state, Oklahoma, which is eastern redbud, leafcutter bees that's where they primarily get their cell dividers as they build their nest in tubes. So if you've ever seen your eastern redbud with a bunch of almost perfectly rounded cuts, it's the leafcutter bees, the native bees, the solitary bees that are working your redbud. Doesn't hurt the redbud. The other thing that's very interesting about the eastern redbud, and many people may find this interesting, is do you realize it's also important larval host plant for over 20 species of Lepidoptera across the continent. That's a phenomenal number for one plant to be so critical for so many species of butterflies and moths. Everybody usually knows the elfins, Henry's elfins, that's the butterfly, but there's also 20 some odd species of moths that rely on the redbud. And then on the Texas thistle, many of you may know, it's the straw that the thistle produces is harvested by bumblebees and used in their nesting cavities, so in the burrows. So that's why it's important for nesting behavior. Back to you, Erin.
Thank you. All right, we've got a good number of people that have voted now, so we're going to move forward. Looks like the peak, which is also what happened on Wednesday. I think a lot of people want to know when's what are the most seeds going to be right for harvest? That's the most useful, but also duration is coming out as on top, so that makes sense. All right, so one more little set of feedback that we'd like to get from you, and this is more on the side of how to visualize data. So I'm going to spend just a little bit of time giving an orientation to this graph. We saw something similar to this on that deliverable slide, but basically what we're looking at is a calendar. So you've got January on the left side over to December on the right. This is actually a bunch of little lines that represent the weeks of the month. And the gray lines here indicate that someone went out and looked for open flowers on this species. This one's actually for common buttonbush. And they didn't see any flowering, so they said no, so that's gray. And then the orange lines indicate that at least one person said, yes, I see open flowers. And then the darker the orange, the more people, the higher proportion said yes. So when you get the really dark, that's more like 80% of people that were reporting saw it. So this can kind of serve as like an indicator of when the most amount of open flowers were available on the plant. And then on the bottom here, this gives you an idea of how many people were reporting, because this can be very influenced by the amount of people that were looking at different times of the year. You know, if you had a lot of people looking in the spring, and you didn't see anything, and then you had hardly anyone in the summer because everyone was on vacation, you might see really different results. So showing kind of what the sample size is can be helpful there. So that's one way to kind of, show information about when is common buttonbush flowering in this particular area. I think this one was a calendar for Louisiana. Another way is a line graph version. And this one is the similar January to December, but instead of the bars, we're looking at a black line here that's showing the proportion. So instead of the dark orange color, the height of this line indicates more people were saying yes. The sample size here is indicated instead of those bars along the bottom by the size of these circles for each of the weeks. So the larger the circles, the more people reporting information. So up to 18 here, and then the really tiny ones are more like 6. This graph, in addition to those 2 pieces of information, has a third piece of information, which represents the uncertainty around this line, which is indicated by the gray shading here. So the smaller the shading, the more certain we are. The bigger the shading, the more uncertain we are. So this shows us that we're pretty sure that open flowers started in early May. That's a smaller, but we're less certain that this is the peak in when open flowers was the highest. And we're less certain that it kind of dipped here until we get down to more people consistently saying no at other times of the year. So this kind of packs a little bit more information in, but it's a little more complex. So just to kind of like think about your experience with each of these two, which of these two do you feel like is more intuitive to you, that feels like an easier way to kind of understand, look at information about when flowering is happening? And you'll have to pick just one of these this time.
As a bit of a FYI, y'all, there's some great questions that are showing up in the chat. If you will, please post your questions to the Q&A so that we can capture them as we move forward with the workshop. We're going to share all of the Q&A questions to both groups that have participated in the workshops. And we really want to make, I mean, we're getting some great questions, but try to put them in the Q&A. That way I can monitor them. I'm unable to monitor the chat right now. That's why I'm asking you to do that. The chat has got a lot of stuff popping up in it right now. But if you've got a question, please post them to the Q&A and we will get them. That way I can record when they've been answered. And if they're still open, we can get to them. Okay. We did have a question. I do want to answer this one for the group. Celeste brought up a really good question about whether leafcutter bees go after coralberry and elbowbush. I don't know much about elbowbush. It's not a plant I'm very familiar with, but I do know they do go after coralberry. And apparently it has to do with the texture and the smoothness and flatness of the leaf. But I have seen them cutting on coralberry. So yes, Celeste, great question. Thank you.
All right, so it looks like the slight preference here is for the heat map calendar. But a lot of people also felt that the line graph was intuitive too. So that was a similar result to Wednesday, I think. And yeah, we'll be grappling with this as we go forward, and there'll be more opportunities to weigh in. We'll probably have a revised version of this for future surveys, where maybe we're incorporating a little bit of both or adjusting it slightly. But thank you for your input on that. So now we're going to do a very brief overview of how you can actually collect data as part of this project through the USA-NPN's Nature's Notebook platform. And just keep in mind, by the end of this, you're not going to know exactly how to collect data. There's more to learn for sure, but we just want to give you kind of a taste of what it's like so you have an understanding of what it looks like, what the system looks like. And then we'll be telling you about some more opportunities for training later on. So when you participate in Nature's Notebook, the first thing you have to do is you have to find a plant. So you'll be picking a plant or one or more plants from this priority list, hopefully. Again, if there's something that you really, really want to observe that's on our list, you can still observe it if it's a Nature's Notebook, but really try to find something from the priority list. This can be a plant in your own backyard. As we mentioned, even if your plant or your yard is watered, you can indicate that in Nature's Notebook. But you can also do this in more of a public area. Say there's a garden that you visit, a trail that you go to. You can pick a plant in that location as well. Once you've selected your plant, what you're going to be doing is you're going to be making repeat visits to that plant over time. So we do recommend starting small, pick just a couple species from the list. It might be tempting to pick everything, but you're going to get quickly overwhelmed. So definitely start small. We are looking for regular data collection. So I have on here once a week. It can really change at different times of the year. Keep in mind that what we're trying to do is trying to capture information about when the flowering starts, when it peaks, the duration. And so if you know that there's flowers on your plant that are not open yet, and you really want to capture when they first start opening, you might make more frequent visits to your plant during that time of year. Maybe you'll go out every day and look at your plant so you can really capture that first date. And the nice thing about this is every time you go out to observe, you get to report something. Even if there's nothing happening on your plant, you get to report a no record, which is very important. It's negative data, but we really like that data because it helps us to know when you first started saying yes. So you can imagine if you went out to your plant and you didn't report anything until your first yes, someone looking at your data doesn't know if that was the first time you visited your plant or if you went yesterday. So by putting in those no's, that's very critical to be able to identifying when things start, when they peak, and when they end. And we're really interested in multiple years of data collection. So when you're doing this, try to think of it as something you'll be participating in for several years if you can, because your data that are collected for multiple years are so valuable. If you think about you're going back to the same plant and then you're going back again next year, you can be recording information about what happens in really different weather. So maybe this year, it's a really late spring, you're recording that information. Next year, it's an early spring. You have the same plant that you're tracking, and we can know how your plant's responding to those different conditions, which is really, really valuable from the data analysis side of things. So this is just kind of an overview of kind of the commitment that you're going to expect with this project. Just to get into a little more detail about this in a visual way, so we are trying to capture, the start, peak, and end of flowering. If you're collecting data on a plant and say you're only doing it every 6 days, and you're reporting no, no, and then yes, this is the period of uncertainty that the people that are doing the data analysis are dealing with. So they don't know what happened during these 6 days. If you're doing it more frequently, then it's a much smaller period of uncertainty, which is much easier for the data analysis. When it comes to the peak in flowering timing, we actually have questions not just about, yes, I see open flowers, or no, I don't, but how many flowers do you see and what % of those flowers are open? And what you're trying to do is you're putting your estimate into a set of bins. These are groups of percentages, so we're not telling you what's the exact percentage of open flowers on your plant. Tell us, is it 67 or is it 68? We're telling you, can you give us an estimate? Is it less than 5%? Is it 5 to 24? And this will get much easier as you become familiar with your plant. And keep in mind that what we're interested in having you do is capture this peak. So even if you miss the less than 5%, maybe you missed this one, if you can start here and just kind of tell us how it's progressing over time, that's the most valuable piece of information. So don't overthink it too much. Do what you can. You can always skip anything on the data sheet, but that's kind of the information we're going for. So we are now going to try to make some observations using some photographs. So we're going to be using a little bit of different type of a poll here. So this is a picture of common milkweed. And I just want to point out that if you're looking at this on your device right now, I recommend going back to looking at your computer screen because you're going to be able to see the full photo. If you're on your device, you might have this picture cut off. So you can scroll down and look at it, or just look at the full picture on the actual webinar screen. So I'm going to be launching a poll now, which is actually a Zoom poll, so a little bit different than the ones we've been doing. This poll is going to have a couple questions on it about what you see on this plant. It is going to exactly match the questions that we're asking on the Nature's Notebook data sheet. So 2 questions: do you see flowers or flower buds? Yes, no, or uncertain. We have that uncertain, the question mark, because people often want to say something even if they don't know the answer. And so we put that on there so you can still say something even if you don't know if it's yes or no. And we give you a lot of details on there. You can see it's a pretty long paragraph. So when you first do this, you're having to read through and kind of understand what we're asking for. There's some scientific terms in there. One key term to point out is an inflorescence. So common milkweed has these balls of flowers that's called an inflorescence. So we're asking you to look at those structures. So especially when you get to the second question, how many flowers or flower buds, you're counting those heads of flowers, okay? So the inflorescences themselves. And again, with the question about how many, there's always that not sure option. So don't try to answer if you're not sure. And I know it's hard in a photograph, if you're in there in person with this plant, you can walk around it, you can be looking at it, you can touch it and move it. So it's much easier. I know it's hard to do on a photograph, but just to kind of get a taste of what it's like for doing this way. So I'm gonna give it a little more time.
Aaron, while we got a little voting going on, let me
Yeah.
answer a housekeeping question. Victoria asked how, if it was possible to find out who her quote unquote partners in crime in the Austin area in terms of native horticulture might be. Obviously, getting connected to Time Restore would be a great way to do that, particularly on our quarterly calls where you get to meet other people and participate in that way in the sharing of information. But also feel free to reach out to our partners at Texas Master Naturalists through AgriLife and Texas Master Gardeners. You can also reach out to a number of other organizations in the Austin area that are focused on plants and native plants in particular, like the Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center, which is in the Austin area. So there's a number of ways to do that. Victoria, I'd be happy to follow up with you to see if we can make some connections there. And another one, Celeste asked if the slides or the presentation will be available afterwards. Yes, we are recording this presentation. We recorded the Wednesday presentation. Both of those within the next 2 weeks will show up on the website. So the website where you went to register for this workshop will become a clearinghouse for information as we push it back out. Remember, we want you engaged in all points in this process. So the presentations will be available. We invite you to actively view them and share them with others who may be interested in this particular project.
Yeah, and someone just commented that it seems like it closed. I'm not sure how it closed. Let me see if I can reopen it. Stop sharing. I'm gonna see. Okay, sorry about that. Let me launch it again in case you didn't get a chance. I'm not sure how it got ended, but yeah, go ahead and you should be able to answer again now. There we go. Sorry about that. Technology.
Yeah. Thank you, y'all, everyone, for being so patient here. We knew when we were setting out to do a workshop with so many people that we knew would participate. We knew we were going to push the margins of all of this technological capability. But today was better than Wednesday, and hopefully tomorrow will be better than today. And thank you for your patience. We think that getting your input in is however we have to do it is critical for the project and our efforts.
Okay, so yes, much more people voting now. Thank you all.
Yeah, much more. Yes.
It's like only 5. That seems like a low number. We'll give it a little bit more time.
Celeste, you asked a question about uncertainty. Can you clarify that? And we'll try to get that question answered for you.
The question marks. So
yeah,
if you're not sure about whether this answer is a yes or no for question number 1, use that question mark. In the database that this goes into, it'll be marked as a question mark. So data users will be able to see, well, you looked, but you just weren't sure. The nice thing about the question mark too is it's kind of a placeholder. So if you went back to this plant the next day or a week later and you realize, oh, I do know what the answer was, you can go back and change that later. So you can go into your account and you can move that question mark to a yes or a no and resubmit, and that'll update it. So having that question mark is kind of a nice place to just say, I'm not sure yet, but maybe I'll know more later. And then the not sure on the uncertainty is just you don't feel like you can answer the question and you looked, but you just weren't sure.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'm gonna end the poll. Let's see if I can share the results. Okay, so it looks like almost everyone said yes, which is I think the right answer here. We do see some flower heads here on this plant, so there are flowers present. And then how many flowers are present? This is tricky, I think, because you're trying to count, with these little ones you can kind of see in the back here. I think any of these 2 answers, 3 to 10 or 11 to 100 are the ones I would go with. I think there's probably somewhere around just over, probably in that 11 to 100 bin, because you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. I count at least 15 on here. So I would go with that 11 to 100 bin, but again, this is something where it'll get easier as you go. If you were there in person, you'd be much more able to count the inflorescences here. So good job on the first try there. All right, I'm going to go on to the next one. So I'm going to launch another poll. So you might have to close it on your end if you're still seeing it. And I'm going to launch the next one here. So this question is going to be about open flowers. So do you see open flowers? And it tells you what open flowers are in that definition. And then what percentage of all of the flowers are open? And so you're going to have to kind of give your best judgment about across all of these. Um, yeah, so it says on here too in the definition, for species in which individual flowers are clustered in flower heads, estimate the percentage of all individual flowers are open. So this is a little bit different for this question. We're not asking you to say how many inflorescences have an open flower. We're asking you about how many across all of these inflorescences, what's the percentage that are open? So you do have to kind of assess the individual flowers, and then you have to also kind of do an average. So trying to look at all the individual flowers and use your best guess how many of these little guys are open. And this is something that definitely gets easier after you're more familiar with your plant. And if you thought about this for a while, you answered the question, when you come back to this plant next week, it'll be much easier to be able to make that estimate because you've already kind of made an assessment and you can tell how it might look different than the previous week. All right, give it a little more time.
Another housekeeping question, Erin. Victoria asked if there were currently weekly surveys for participants to report on relevant data points in their area. I think she's referring to the project we're talking about, so you may want to field that question.
Yeah, so I'm not sure what survey means in that question.
Yeah.
Like a prompt to record data, or does it have to do with something else? Surveys about the deliverables? Maybe clarify.
Yeah, I'm assuming, yeah, and Victoria, jump in there if you want to clarify on the question. I'm assuming that she's actually talking about how regularly is data collected under the project, and we ask that you try to do it weekly because it makes that much of a difference in the data set. But if you were asking a different question, please feel free to clarify in your question. And Victoria, if you'd like to do that verbally, please raise your hand and we'll get to you when we get a minute.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to end this one. We've got a good number of people that voted. So everyone's saying yes, that's great. There are open flowers. These little open flowers here, we can see the reproductive structures in the middle of the petals here. And then as for the percentage, yes, there's a lot of discrepancy here. I think this is the tricky one. So if you're kind of judging across these three inflorescences that we can see, what percentage? I mean, you could go through and you could try to count 1, 2, 3, and then try to count all the buds. That's a lot. What I would try to do is kind of think about the surface area that's covered by these flowers, and then what's the surface area by the part that's open. And it's a little bit of a perspective thing since the camera is closer to one of these. But I would probably put this in either the 5 to 24% or the 25 to 49%, probably in that lower one. But yeah, it's a little hard to tell. But yeah, I would probably go with, I think it's probably right around maybe 20 or less than that. So I think I would probably go with the 5 to 24, which is what a lot of you said. So it's a tricky one. Again, use that not sure as you get to know your plant, and then you can start reporting on that once you get more confident with this. Okay, we got a couple more. So let's do this one now, which is about the fruits. So let me launch this next poll. So this one also has two questions. Do you see fruits? And then how many fruits are present?
Another question came up, Erin. I'll answer it while they're voting. The question came up of, is it possible to tag team on data collection as part of this project, 2 or 3 going to different times to the same place? Absolutely. In fact, setting up sites is a big part of Nature's Notebook. In fact, we encourage it because more individuals working the same site, one can see and collect data more efficiently, but also it helps it be a group activity, which can be a lot of fun. We especially encourage it at botanical gardens, places that have public access, because many of these gardens, zoos, etc., like to have active participants in their facilities. So this might be a great way to do a partnership. I'd be happy when we get later into this presentation. Aaron's going to talk about how to connect with me on this. Be happy to help you set one of those up. So yes, Tina, absolutely. Tag teaming is great.
Awesome. Okay, I'm going to close the poll. Let's look at what you said. So yes, everyone said yes. That's right. There are fruits on here, these structures. For our definitions for fruits, we actually have this species-specific information. So it actually says for Asclepias syriaca, which is common milkweed, what the fruit looks like. And then you'll see we also have something for what the ripe fruit looks like. I think I might have forgotten to put the extra information about the fruits, but how many fruits are present? So in this one, you're actually looking at the individual fruits, not the structures that were the inflorescences. So keep that in mind. Most people said 11 to 100. I think that's a great estimate because it does look like there's more than 10 on here and less than 100. So good job on that one. Let's go on to the last one, which is about the ripe fruits or seeds. Okay. So this one is, do you see ripe fruits? And then what percentage on the plant are ripe? And an important thing to note here is in that first definition, you see it says, do not include empty fruits that have already dropped all of their seeds.
Aaron, Celeste asked a question about priority species in an assigned area. Will the website have known information available about them, or will we use our interactions and meetings to learn more about the species that we've been able to determine to date? Or would there be an expectation that there be more collaboration together on your own as part of the project? You want to take that?
Is that just to clarify, learning about more of the natural history?
Yeah.
You mean where
Yeah.
species identification?
Yeah.
So we will have some help materials on the website. We have resources like a phenophase photo guide, which is a 2-page or one page front and back guide that has some information about the natural history and how to identify the species. But we don't have a lot of species identification resources. We are kind of relying on you all to figure out what you have in your yard. And you can there's great apps out there now like Seek through iNaturalist and all the resources that you're already tapped into. So really what we're trying to do is once you have your plant identified, we're helping you know how do I answer the questions on the Nature's Notebook data sheet about, what is this phenophase or this phase that I'm answering questions about. So that's where most of the resources are focused on. And we have that on the Time to Restore has a landing page. We'll have resources on there. There's also, once you sign up for Nature's Notebook, there's a lot of help resources in there. We have a training course that you can take. It takes about 5 hours and you can go through all the modules if you want. It is optional. There's also a FAQ page that has a ton of questions that people ask about observing and about the different phases on the plants. Okay, I'm going to end this one. Let's look at what you said. Do you see ripe fruit? So most people said yes. There's some, I like people using the question mark there if you're not sure. So yes, these, when you look at the definition here, a fruit is considered ripe when it has turned tan or brown, had split open to expose seeds with fluff. So we've got 2 of these on here that have the seeds with fluff. So we can say, yes, there are ripe fruits. As for the percentage, it's hard when you're doing percentages with few structures. So really, I would probably say 95%. So this one on the right, I think has dropped all of its seeds. It's got this thing in the middle, but I think that's just the part of the capsule of this plant. So we've got 2 seeds or 2 fruits that we're looking at on here, and they both have ripe seeds. So I would say 95% or more. If you're looking at a plant that has a lot more structures, it might be even easier to do this because it's easier to estimate the percentage there. But I know there's a lot of different responses here. So it is, yeah, I think tricky to answer these intensity questions. So definitely if you're not comfortable, don't answer those right away and get to know your plant first before you answer those. We also have a module in the observer certification course on the website where it's all about intensity. So that'll be really helpful as well to go through. All right. So, as David was just talking about, we do have the ability for you all to participate as part of a group. So these are called local phenology programs. We have many, many hundreds of these across the country, with a few in Texas as well already, but we'd love to see more of these. These basically are ways that you can participate together. You have a shared site or one or more sites where you can share observation duties. So you can trade off and who observes the plants. You can, see what other people have reported. It's a great way to keep things kind of social. You can do calibrations to make sure everyone's kind of on the same page about the questions. We have a lot of resources to support local phenology programs. So we have a special certification course for local phenology leaders. We have one that's going to be starting up next month, probably at the end of the month. We offer that twice a year. We'll have another one in the spring. It's a 10-week course. It's a great way to kind of do a lot of program planning and figure out what you want to do, get help with like volunteer recruitment and retention. And then we also have an ongoing community of practice, which is a way to keep people kind of connected. We have monthly calls that you can come to where we have leaders sharing resources and experiences. We have a listserv, we have a Facebook group. We send out newsletters to these people, so lots of different ways to support you there. And we do want to mention that while we really prefer Nature's Notebook data collection because it's a great way to be able to capture the start, the peak, and the end of flowering and fruiting, I know there's a lot of huge iNaturalist fans in Texas, and iNaturalist is great, and we are planning as part of this project to download data from iNaturalist on our priority species and supplement our Nature's Notebook data with those records. So if you really love iNaturalist, go for it, collect data. I will say there's a project that we have, the USA-NPN Time to Restore project. We only have those 8 species on there right now, plus I think one that was a similar species. We're going to be adding on our priority Texas species as well to that project. So that's a way to participate there. Some of you who are big iNaturalist users might be aware of annotations. And there are some new phenology annotations that are now standardized that we worked with iNaturalist on. So if you are going to collect data through iNat, please go back through. I know you have to do this later. You can't do it as part of your observation, but add those annotations for open flowers and ripe seeds, and that will be really helpful for this project too. And we'd love your help spreading the word. So if you're part of a group, a chapter, an organization, maybe your neighborhood, we would love for you to spread the word. And we have lots of resources to help you do that. So please think about it, how you can connect other people to this project. And we're going to be talking more about that too. So we'd love to hear from you. If you have any particular ideas about how we can generate enthusiasm for this project, how we can do outreach to new people in Texas, and then also how can we sustain interest? We want to get people excited about this project, but we also want to make sure we're supporting them and providing a space to like keep the interest going. So one more poll for you here on the Mentee. So back on your device, if it hasn't advanced, make sure you go to advanced slide. Share with us what are some of your best ideas that you have for trying to help us with recruitment and engagement. We would love to hear them.
Aaron, there's been questions. I'll try to, in the interest of time, let me try to answer some of the questions to keep us moving along. Martin asked about being able to chart distinguishing between a species occurring in a yard or wildscape versus one that's in the wild. Keep in mind that when you collect the data, it's geo identified as part of your profile. So we know where you're actually at when you're collecting that data. So we can make some assumptions about the data as to whether it's a residential yard or in a more natural area, Martin. So hopefully that'll answer your question. Thank you for that input. It's a great question. Amanda asked about propagation. Was ease of propagation taken into the assemblage of our proposed priority target list? And it wasn't. And the reason why is we're hoping to really focus in on flowering and seed production. That's where this project really kind of comes together as 2 points in the overall phenology equation that we're really trying to assess. So propagation was not, Amanda, but I do recognize that propagation would make frog fruit a very valuable species. Thank you.
We've got a lot of great ideas coming in here. Yes, we will be talking about the Master Naturalist meeting in a moment. We've got some other great associations and chapters and organizations on here. Yeah, if there are people who have pollinator gardens or are looking to put one in, that would be great. We'd love to have student engagement. We have I didn't talk about this, but we have a whole education section on our website. We have a lot of lesson plans for different grade levels on there. So it's a nice way you can send that if you have a teacher friend or you are a teacher, send that as a way to kind of get familiar with phenology and then invite them to participate in Nature's Notebook. They can, at a school, form a local phenology program. We have a lot of those and it's really popular. I think we do recommend it's for kind of middle school and above. You can do it with younger grade levels, but I think it definitely involves more teacher guidance. And the students can't have their own accounts if they're under 13 because of the Privacy Act. So you'd have to have a teacher kind of submitting data on behalf of the students, but we love to have student involvement. We've had people do it in all grade levels, really popular at the university level, high school level, and middle school. These are really great. We're going to take some time and digest all of these, and then we'll be sending around a summary. But yeah, I really appreciate all the input here.
Erin, Evelyn brought up a point on one of the surveys when we were assessing the flowering on the photos. Evelyn, please keep in mind what we're trying to do is just expose you to a bit of how we collect the data. Doing this off of photos is not the way to do it. We just wanted you as participants in the workshop to kind of get a feel for how we collect data as it relates to time to restore. So yeah, please, we recognize that there's a lot of variability in what people are seeing via photo. It's also a great invitation to do this collaboratively with other participants. That way you can really rally around that the efficiency in your data determination. So yeah, please bear with this. We appreciate all of your willingness to kind of be patient with us as we try to use this technology to give you a feel for the overall project.
Thank you. All right, let's move on. So did want to mention that if you are a master naturalist, I'm going to pass this to David, actually. I'm going to let you talk about this one because you're the one doing it.
Yeah, well, one, thank you guys for such a wonderful participation today. It's been wonderful. And we recognize that there are limitations to the virtual experience in terms of training, but it was a great way for us to reach a lot of Texans in a very short period of time to get this project rolled out. All that said, I will be at the annual meeting in San Marcos this year in October, late October. We will do a training session on Nature's Notebook at 2 o'clock on Friday during that. So if you're planning on coming to the annual meeting in San Marcos, please come and join that class. I'm happy to do that training in person. I'll also be set up as a booth during the entire conference out in the open area while the annual meeting is going on. Please stop by and introduce yourself. I know we're trying to use virtual connections here to make this project a success, but as all Texans know, it's always better to do things face to face. So please stop by and say hello. I want to know who you are. I want to help you be a success as you participate in this project. Awesome. Back to you, Erin.
Yep, I just wanted to, someone asked about the lesson plans. If you go to the USA-NPN.org website, go all the way to the bottom of the page to the footer. That's probably the easiest. And then look for education. It's under the Nature's Notebook section, but you'll get into the education resources from there. And we can post a link to that too.
And then the other question, we can tag this on, Erin.
Sure.
Tracy brought up the issue of the NOAA temperature measurements. I think I'm a little unclear as to how she's worded the question, but I'm thinking she's making the point to try to use your own gauges, which will help make it closer to where you're observing the actual data. So we would think that would be great as well. But if you don't have your own rain gauge, please do use the NOAA temperature gauges because I think that recording that kind of data also helps us along. So thank you, Tracy.
Yeah. Unfortunately, we don't have a way to put in climate information, weather data into your
No.
nature's notebook observation. We kind of made that decision early on. There's a lot of great programs out there that do that. If you have a rain gauge or if you don't have one and you want to, Coco Bras, which I'll put in the chat, is a great program that allows you to input that data. And so that could be an option. And then for this project, we'll actually be pulling in the climate data separately from this whole other system that collects that data. So you don't have to collect that. You can put it in the comments too, though. If you observe your plant and you want to say like, today was really rainy, then you can put that in the text as part of your observations. Okay, so just a little bit of what's next. So watch out, we're going to be sending you the final priority nectar list for Texas. And then at that point, we will invite you to start collecting data. It could be that the species you want to track are not really doing much this year, but you can always go in and report those no's. You'll need a Nature's Notebook account, so you'll have to register. So when you go to the NPN website, you'll see Observe with Nature's Notebook, go into there, and then you'll want to sign up. So it's just a brief form, it asks you to put in your email and your password and all that. Once you have an account, the thing to do to participate in this project is just to find one of those plants from the list that's near you and then register it on your account. You don't have to do any other sign up, don't worry about the local phenology programs if you're not part of that, if you're just doing this independently. You might see campaigns, don't worry about the campaigns, that's something else. We have lots of different projects all across the country. This is just a project where just find one of those priority species, add it to your nature's notebook, and then make your observations. We are interested in the flowering and the seed observations. It's called fruit in nature's notebook. So you'll see there's lots of other questions on there too, like about the leaves. You're welcome to report on those too. Especially for milkweeds, you might be wanting to do that. But you can always skip those questions too. We're really just interested in flowering and fruiting. So focus efforts on those. And then please join us for our quarterly calls. You'll be invited to join us for those. I think the first one coming up is in October, and we'd love to have you there. You can stay up to date on the project, and you'll at least get our emails about it anyway, even if you don't want to join us for the actual calls. If you don't want to be on that list, just let me know and I can take you off, but you'll be on there by default. So you'll be up to date on the project from those emails.
Erin, we've had a lot of questions about the website. I have just posted the website address into the chat. Please copy it so you'll have that. And also keep in mind, y'all, this question came up on Wednesday. There is no time to restore project to select. By creating your profile, you become part of the project. So we had some confusion after people left the workshop on Wednesday. You, by creating your profile in Nature's Notebook, become part of this project. So please join us.
Wow, there's been a lot of questions that you've answered.
Yes.
I can see that. Thank you for doing that.
I knew we were running out of time. So
yeah, we've got a few minutes left. And I'm going to advance this slide just so you all can see our emails. And just a reminder about all the different people part of this project. But let's see if we can get to a couple of those questions. Do you have any, David, that you thought were particularly relevant? I see a question about what happens with the data. So really what the data are going to be used for is informing pollinator restoration. So, like we described earlier, letting people have more informed decisions about what to plant to support pollinators at different times with different bloom periods, how they can understand how things might be shifting with climate change. Maybe there's a species that won't be very suitable to support a pollinator of interest because it's going to be shifting, so they can pick out another one. So the kind of final vision of this project is a big calendar that shows you when everything is expected to be flowering for your area, and then how we project that's going to change, and kind of you could look at future conditions in different time periods.
Erin, Stephen asked a question that's important about if there are no final target species nearby, how can they still contribute? Stephen, if that's a concern, there are very few parts of the state that won't have at least a few species that do apply. So I don't know that could happen. But if you have concerns that might happen, send me an email and we'll work that out as we finalize this list. The intent is to have a list that at least some core group of species works in every corner of the state. Maybe out in far west Texas, we may have a bit of a problem. but I bet we can find something that works. We want everyone to participate. This project is meant to be as inclusive as possible, so please be part of this group.
Looks like we have a raised hand. Sean Walton, we're going to unmute you if you would like to say something or ask a question.
I'm sorry, ask the question again.
Oh, we see your hand is raised. I didn't know if you had something for us.
Oh, no, I didn't. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Just did it.
I will lower it for you. What else?
Marsha, I posted the website into the chat, so please copy it. If for some reason you don't get it and you have trouble navigating, please send me an email, y'all. dgwen@ymail.com. Send me any emails. We'll get your questions answered. Katie, you also asked about TxDOT, and TxDOT's actually a partner here in the effort and has been part of this conversation since the very beginning. So yes, they are part of this process. We are trying to be as inclusive as possible with all possible partners as making this project a success for our state.
Thank you all so much. You have been an amazing, very engaged audience, and we're just so grateful that you took 2 hours of your Saturday morning to join us today. We'll be following up with you, so don't worry, you'll hear from us soon. But we just really want to say thanks. And we're really excited for the enthusiasm about this project in Texas.
Yeah. Thank you for your patience with the technology, y'all. We know we pushed it to the very limits, but we think that letting y'all have direct input in this process was critical. So thank you for your patience. We know it didn't quite work every time as we had envisioned, but it worked pretty good. And that makes us all proud as Texans to be able to be part of this project now. Thank you.
All right, with that, we will get to the rest of the questions on email and follow up with you all. And we hope you have a great rest of your Saturday. Thank you all.